So hello and welcome back to Susty Talk, Edie's series of video interviews designed to keep you connected to sustainability leaders throughout lockdown and beyond. I'm really delighted to be calling a familiar face for this episode. We've had so many new contacts on for this series, but it's really good to catch up with Josh Davies, who is the Sustainability Manager at Multiplex. How are you doing?
Yes, very well, thank you, Sarah. How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, holding up okay. As I was saying, I could sure go for it some precedented times and to be back in the office, but that's not going to happen for a little while. I don't think, and I know that you've told me that you're back in the office today, but I'm presuming that the ways of working for yourself and the rest of the Multiplex sustainability team will have looked a bit different these past few months.
Yeah, no, it's been a significant change. Just firstly, want to say thank you very much for having me here today. It's a great honour to be a guest on the Susty Talk. Something I've been using to keep up to date with what all other businesses are doing around sustainability. So I think it's a great initiative that you launched during the pandemic, and keen to see it kind of keep going. So yeah, I think as you say, it's been a significant change to the way we've worked. For those that haven't heard of Multiplex before, just kind of a bit of an introduction. We're a global contractor working in Europe, Canada, the Middle East, Australia and India, and we've been going for about 50 years, just over 50 years now. Mm-hmm. In Europe specifically, we've been in operation since 1999, and we're behind some pretty big developments in the UK, Wembley Stadium, 22 Bishopsgate in the City of London, and then Centrepoint in Oxford Street, just as a couple. So typically we don't work on small scale projects. We kind of do really difficult, large, complex structures all around the world. So at the end of March, just as the nationwide lockdown came in, we were one of the first contractors to shut our sites, just to kind of really limit the impact of COVID on the health and well-being of our staff and our supply chain as well. We then started opening sites probably 2 weeks afterwards, in line with the Construction Leadership Council's guidance, and slowly since then we've been increasing the amount of work we've been able to do on sites in, safely, to try and build up to pre-COVID productivity. At the beginning of April, I was placed on furlough for 6 weeks, along with a range of other staff from the business, especially during the period where we had no work taking place, and that included the rest of the sustainability team. I then had an additional, so that was for 6 weeks. I then had an additional 4 weeks of paternity leave. So the 4 weeks are a new feature at Multiplex, and I was very grateful for that, to be able to spend some time at home with the newborn. Mm-hmm. So I think, like most people, this period has been, very challenging, and certainly had some good days and some bad days since March. But I've really tried to kind of look at it as positive as I can, and I found it was a really good period to kind of reflect on my career to date, and also kind of refocus my goals for the future. But ultimately, it was just really good to spend some time at home with my wife and the newborn. So I had those 10 weeks away from the business. I then returned, and a range of our team had returned prior to that, and also subsequently after. So I'm now happy to say that the department's back in action. We're all kind of back in place, and we obviously had a period of readjustment, working from home, kind of catching up with our projects where we could. And going in, just for essential activities, really, to do, site inspections or specific site activities. We've definitely, as a team, really seen a massive uptake in MS Teams and across the whole business as well, which would never have happened a year ago in construction, especially in our business. So definitely think there's been some real good efficiencies that have come from that. I know personally in our team, we've had it's a much more efficient approach since we're not traveling to so many meetings now. Mm-hmm. So after that kind of readjustment period, we kind of focused on getting the projects back up to our standards that we expect, and finalising our annual sustainability report, which we had planned to get out Q2, but with the team off, we kind of had to pick that back up when we got all back in July and August. So we managed to launch that report last week, and now we're very much focused on finalising our longer term strategy for the future, with again the aim of launching that by the end of the year. So very big changes for the team, but overall, we've adapted pretty well, and I think we're now into a good kind of way of working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you guys still managed to do quite a lot during that period. And the report that you mentioned, the Positive Impact Report for Europe, is the first one since the business committed to set science-based targets in line with 1.5C, and obviously 1.5C and net zero massive focuses for our readers at the moment. So it would be good to hear about some of the first steps towards that target.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a bit of detail on that. So as I said, we launched our report back last week in World Green Building Week. And the report, we had a report for each of our regions, and the European report is kind of focused on 3 key areas of environment, people and community. As you say, environment's got a heavy focus at the moment, especially around climate change, and we think that's particularly important for us, given the fact that the built environment accounts for 39% of global carbon emissions, be that in the construction or the operation. So we've got a lot to kind of do to kind of shift that down. In the report, we state that we've been able to reduce our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 60% compared to 2018, which we're very proud of, and we're aiming still to try to go for carbon neutrality by the end of the year for Scope 1 and 2. Key way we did that was switching our electricity tariffs to renewable tariffs, and really pushing to ensure that we are not using generators on our sites, and ensuring that we're basically getting onto temporary building electricity supplies as soon as possible, to really kind of reduce the fuel use on the site. But that said, Scope 1 and Scope 2 is only, it's less than 1% of our global footprint or European footprint. So Scope 3 is really where we're going to be focusing going forward. In 2019, 280,000 tonnes worth of carbon associated with our Scope 3. So a very large amount still to bring down. And those two key areas within Scope 3 for us are our building materials, as you'd imagine, the embodied carbon associated with them, and getting those materials to our sites, and also the energy use from our completed buildings. So for our materials, our key step at the moment is to ensure that our subcontractors are aligned with 1.5 degree carbon reduction, because ultimately we're going to need them to join us on our journey if we're going to have any hope in decarbonising our business and the wider industry. But we think, if we are able to get those kind of key players on board, which we're working very closely with at the moment, we should be able to help shift the wider industry as well, and kind of that decarbonisation. So each member of the sustainability team at Multiplex are basically working with at least one subcontractor, coaching them and just really trying to help them set their carbon reduction for scopes 1, 2 and 3. That's kind of what we're doing, longer term, but we're also working with them on our projects at the moment to see if we can select alternative materials that, are lower carbon, or, fundamentally have high recycled content in them, to kind of really start to see some immediate reductions. So that's one part of Scope 3. The other really big part is the completed building use. So we account for basically the carbon of a completed building for 60 years. That's the average life of a new building in the UK. So we account for that carbon every year when we complete a building. So you can see there's a very big work stream for us there to work with our architects, engineers, consultants, and our client teams to really design and operate more efficient buildings. So some of the steps we've taken recently are to switch the heating in those buildings to electric alternatives. So Western Yards, one of the projects I'm responsible for, we've moved from CHP to heat pumps recently. And another project which we finished this year, 80 Charlotte Street for Derwent, is now fully electric. So again, helping them kind of in their route to decarbonising. But going forward, I think it's going to be really key for us to complete post-occupancy evaluations of our completed buildings, so we can really look to close the performance gap between the design of the building and actually how it operates. So we're going to be focusing on that going forward and trying to learn from our recent completions to see how we can improve on future builds, because ultimately that's a really big focus to make sure that the buildings operate the way they're meant to.
Yeah, of course, collaboration will have to play a massive role in any sort of 1.5C or net zero transition. And you've talked a lot there about sort of the value chain and about some of the tenants and some of the other people you have to work with, but I know that Multiplex is also signed on to World GBC's Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment, which is something we saw a lot of announcements about with World Green Building Week earlier this month. So what does collaboration with initiatives like that look like? How does it impact definitions of things like net zero and delivery as well?
Yeah, I think we're really proud to be part of that net zero carbon building commitment. We made the commitment last year, and we see it as really an important step on our journey to net zero, and it really complements our science-based target approach as well. As you say, it's very much focusing on our office spaces, and we're going to ensure that we only own or occupy assets which operate at net zero by 2030, so not very long away. And ultimately, we think it's a really important step in decarbonising the industry. We're going to take a best practice approach to energy use on site first and foremost, to really try and reduce Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which I've already said is not the biggest area of our emissions, but it's still very important that we at least get on top of that quickly. So by signing the commitment, we've joined, I think it's 72 other businesses as of today that I checked earlier. And I think, as you said, it's going to be a great opportunity for us to collaborate with people in our own industry, whether that's other contractors, real estate developers, designers and manufacturers, to kind of share learning and to basically try and ensure that we meet that 2030 target. We're going to, as I said, really focus on energy reduction first and foremost, and then look to go for on-site and then off-site renewables, with a final piece of the pie being the carbon offsetting, which we ultimately see as the very last resort. So we have a carbon hierarchy, and offsetting is at the very bottom of that. We think it will be part of the solution, but certainly it's not what we're going to focus on in the first instance. And then in the spirit of collaboration, we've also signed the Contractors Declare movement. So Multiplex were one of the first of the 8 initial contractors to set up that movement, which is very similar to what the architects declare from last year. And the idea behind that really is to have a single aim of inspiring all contractors to unite behind net zero, be it those that are very far on their sustainability journey and others that are just starting. Because ultimately, if we want to decarbonise the whole industry, we need everyone to go on that journey. It can't just be a select few. So that's one of the reasons we're really keen to collaborate on that as well.
Great. Well, Josh, we've talked a lot in depth about carbon and energy, and I'm sure that will be so helpful to a lot of people. Often I get really top line carbon and energy commitments and I really want to dive into them, but I think we've done that quite a lot. But as well as a massive role in the low carbon transition, there's clearly a big role for construction to play in delivering a COVID recovery that is socially just as well. And that's been a big focus, I think, during the past month or so. And I know that the report has a lot of highlights around this and a lot of details of plans for the coming months. But what would you pick out yourself on this agenda?
I think it's a really important point, really. If we're gonna build back better, we need to bring everyone on that journey, and I think social sustainability will be absolutely critical as we move forward. So in the report, and a few things that are not quite in this year's report to kind of highlight, we've launched a Respect Committee, which is a task force led by our managing director, and is really very much focused on developing our diversity and inclusion strategy, which I think is very important for construction to kind of open, to become more accessible to a wider range of people. Under that committee, they've launched Multiplex, which is our flexible working policy. So this was on the cards to be launched at the beginning of the year, but ultimately with COVID, that's really expedited its introduction into the business, and pleased to say that most people are now making use of that policy. In the last year, the business has also updated its paternity and maternity leave. So I've already mentioned I've made the most of that, but maternity leave has now been extended to 39 weeks fully paid. Paternity week is now 4 weeks fully paid, and then more importantly, there's now additional options for those who wish to share parental leave, which I think is really important going forward. Health and safety still remains critical to construction. It's very dangerous. It can be a very dangerous sector. So in 2019, 7 of our live sites, so just under half, went 100% reportable injury free, which was a very big achievement for us. Another real key focus area for us, and probably even more relevant with the pandemic, is that 1 in 8 of our staff are now trained mental health first aiders. I'm happy to say that I'm one as well, and that's been a real big drive for the business in the last year to 18 months, to really upskill our staff to spot the signs of poor mental health, because there's actually it's a fact that more people die now from committing suicide than actually from injuries on a construction site. So it just shows you how that has become such a big issue, and something we need to really help tackle as well. And then the Health and Safety Department has also recently launched a new strategy with basically the single aim of making our sites the safest and most desirable places to work in Europe in construction, again with the idea of attracting the best talent and to again make it as accessible as possible. A few other points around social sustainability. Modern slavery, another really big hidden evil in our industry, and something that I think has only really come to light in the last few years. Last year we launched an ethical labour management system on Anti-Slavery Day back in October, and that's just really joining up the dots and kind of giving a little bit more structure to how we manage this potential issue on our sites and in our supply chain. So as part of that, we've introduced passport style identification systems, so you can't get on our site unless you've got very good documentation to kind of evidence that, which we believe should help remove some of the issues on our sites. And we're continuing to conduct more worker interviews as well to potentially highlight any issues going forward. And then finally, social value and local employability. So there's a lot on social sustainability here, but social value, and in 2019 we had a social return on investment of just over £2.6 billion. So for every £1 spent was more than £2 worth of social economic impact. And we donated just under £200,000 to charity in 2019. So some really great achievements in 2019, and I think hopefully a lot more to come this year and in 2021 as well.
I think that will be important going forward as well, the sort of measuring the value of this to ensure that there's the proper support.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so that's something we'll see a lot more of. And I wanted to come on to, so we've taken a super deep dive into what Multiplex is doing, but obviously something that a lot of people will be thinking of at the moment, as we've alluded to a lot, is policy. So we've both been on furlough, we've both had things changing here, there and everywhere, and in the construction sector that seems to be happening extra quickly. Things seem to be being announced all the time. So I'd like to get your take on what you make of some of the announcements that have been made so far, and in an ideal world, what you'd like to see Boris Johnson and friends doing to support sustainable construction in the near future as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question, and I think overall the announcements have been positive, but probably not as far-reaching as we would like. So some good initial steps, but a lot more to come, I think. So some highlights for me, starting with the positive. I think the initial £3 billion package for efficiency and reskilling and retrofit is very positive. And the Green Homes Grant, which I believe is due to go live this week, again, is a really important initial step. But again, the key word is initial. With 80% of buildings that will exist in 2050 already around, we really should be focusing on decarbonising our existing stock. I think there was some further research from the Treasury in the last week that said that if there was some additional investment, there could be almost 500,000 jobs created in that sector, which I think is a fantastic way to kind of recover from this terrible pandemic and also align with net zero as well, and probably an efficient way of doing that. So I think that's a good initial step, but more should be done there. I think the announcement of the Future Homes Task Force as well is positive. I think they've got a commitment to ensure house buildings align to the UK net zero target. So I think that will help with a proportion of the other 20% of buildings to come, which is great. And also a bit further afield, but I think the long-awaited Environment Bill to know what that they're looking to introduce some legally binding targets for nature, air, water, and waste will be really positive, not just for our sector, but for every sector going forward, to give a bit more clarity. In terms of where they can improve, I think some areas they can improve, in some areas they certainly need to relook. I think the long-awaited energy white paper and heat strategy and building strategy. I think they're due later this, well, in the autumn. It's going to be critical for our industry to get that kind of clarity that we really need going forward. And I think the other real important point for me is to ensure that the infrastructure investment is reviewed urgently to ensure it aligns with net zero as well, especially in the post-COVID recovery. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a couple of points there that they can kind of look into a bit more and should be really trying to prioritise before the end of the year. And kind of going back to your question as well, I think with all these announcements, what I'm quite happy to see is that the businesses asked our sustainability team to kind of keep an eye on this, to research the changes and also some other mega trends that are happening in our industry and feed that into the future business planning of the business, which I think is really good to see, and I think will help make us more resilient as a business and hopefully help us for any future shocks to come. So yeah, certainly I think there's more that can be done from a policy point of view, but some good initial steps.
Mm-hmm. I know you're not alone in thinking that. I've had very similar conversations. So if anyone's listening and is thinking along the same line of thought, yeah, don't worry. It's very, very much me too. But Josh, I think that's all the questions that we have time for today, and it's been so lovely to catch up.
Yes, so thank you very much for having me today. Really great to have a chat and to share our news.
Anytime. And for everyone listening at home, if you've enjoyed today's video and want to check out our other Susty Talk interviews, they're all on edie.net if you search for the Susty Talk tag, and they're also on our YouTube channel by the Susty Talk playlist. And although lockdown rules are changing and seemingly every week, we're going to be running this series for the foreseeable, so please keep an eye out for future episodes too. But in the meantime, I think we're going to sign off for this episode. So stay safe, stay well, and keep up the Susty Talk.